You mentioned tools for online performance. I mean, we heard a little bit about precision scheduled railroading. We had some very disappointing testimony from Mr. Batory from the FRA regarding some of these 3-mile-long trains and issues with that. And as Ms. Nathanson pointed out, they don't have any 3-mile-long sidings in the Willamette Valley, and I assume elsewhere around the country. So what tools do you need?
First, we need the FRA to complete the standards and metrics, which was created by this committee, I think when Congressman Oberstar was chair, and to set up an on-time metric system. We litigated it for 10 years, finally won after 2 trips to the Supreme Court. So we need that finalized. Second, as a number of the panel has said, a private right of action in order to enforce the preference rights that we have under federal law. In the 40 years since Amtrak's been created, we've only had one situation where the Department of Justice sought to enforce our preference right. So the bottom line is we need the standards and metrics completed by the FRA with a real enforcement mechanism, and then we need to have at Amtrak a private right of action, because the single biggest threat to Amtrak's long-term viability is host railroad delays. It's about 80% of the delays on the national network. And when you can't run on time, it's just core to the product.
Okay. I'd also, in reference to my constituents and their concerns, who purchase sleeper cars, I would like, and we won't go into it now, but just sort of an analysis of what your revenues are or potential revenues from that kind of service versus, a full coach car, and how that all pencils out. Because, I mean, and I will hand you his letter on the way out. I have to leave early, but I'd like to know. Also, last week it came to our attention, we weren't aware of it, actually came from Politico, that you've instituted a mandatory arbitration policy, which seems, I've read it, it is pretty tough. We did address issues of aggregate liability by limiting claims to $200 million quite back in 1997. Perhaps that should have been indexed, but in any case, that is the existing law. I'm curious that why we need this mandatory arbitration policy for covering every and any kind of complaint customers could have. It's pretty standard mandatory arbitration. I mean, if you think about how we deal with all of our claims under the Railway Labor Act, there's a system board of adjustment. It's a pretty common way of trying to streamline and make the claims process more efficient. As you said, we have a statutory limit on damages, and on top of that, we don't, there's no punitive damages. And the arbitration actually is faster. It gives all the same remedies. So our goal is to actually, we spend a fair amount on service recovery at Amtrak. And you've probably read some of the articles in the Washington Post about that, because we want to be a customer-friendly railroad. But at the same time, we want to have an efficient, lawful method for promptly and fairly resolving any passenger claims. Okay. Mr. Matthews, what's in the survival pack? What do we need? I only ride the Northeast Corridor or Portland to Eugene, but I don't do the long distance trains.
So for a lot of our long distance passengers, particularly in the sleeper cars, we have kind of a rolling museum out there, as you know. So the savvy passenger carries duct tape, shims, plastic and wooden, to kind of keep the doors from rattling, Velcro for repairs on the Velcro that holds the curtains together, so that way you can actually keep your curtains closed. There's usually, I've got in here a little hand sanitizer, you never know, and then also a power strip, because there's really never enough power in the cabin to do what you got to do. But everyone has their own version of this, but Velcro and duct tape are pretty common.
Mr. Anderson?
We are making really big investments in the long-distance equipment right now. We're replacing all the locomotives. We took our grant from last year. We're going to make an $800 million investment on all new locomotives for the long-distance network. We're replacing all the bedding, all the pillows, all the mattresses in the long distance, and the Superliner 2s and Amfleet 2s, which are the coach cars, we're putting through complete overhauls in our shops in Beech Grove. So we're making a lot of investment, and to your point, we grew long-distance revenue and long-distance passengers this year faster than Amtrak has grown it in probably the last 10 years.
Yeah.
And next year, we're going to grow the long-distance network passenger counts even higher. So we're making a lot of investments there. We hear you loud and clear about the importance of the national network, but we can't do it if our passengers have equipment that's not in good shape. So we're putting a lot of the national grant, probably all in about $900 million into the long-distance service.
Yeah, about 10 years ago, and I'll be done in a moment, Mr. Chairman, I remember having, I think it was about then, Mr. Boardman here, and I was predicting with the baby boom retiring and with air travel so unpleasant, that more and more people who had time would opt to do that, and I think you're seeing some of that, but we do have to provide them a quality product. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair, I recognize Mr. Crawford, Ranking Member Crawford.